1. The Call to Thornwick. On a misty morning in Thornwick, a small village nestled in the fertile central plains of Eldoria, near the edge of Blackthorn Wood, the air carries a chill of fear that seeps into the bones of every villager. Smoke rises in thin gray tendrils from the thatched roofs of modest homes, curling upward to mingle with the low-hanging fog that blankets the landscape. The village is a patchwork of simple wooden structures, their walls weathered by time and the elements, their windows shuttered against the ever-present threat of danger. The wooden palisade surrounding Thornwick stands as a frail barrier against the outside world, its timbers bearing the scars of recent attacks, deep gouges where axes have bitten into the wood, splintered sections where arrows have struck, and blackened patches where fire has licked at the defenses. A farmer, his hands trembling with a mix of exhaustion and dread, hammers a loose plank into place, his hammer strikes echoing in the quiet morning air. "They'll be back. Gorzod never stops," he mutters to himself, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking the orc leader's name might summon him from the shadows. The villagers move with a hurried, anxious energy, their faces etched with worry as they go about their morning tasks. A woman with a basket of wilted vegetables glances nervously toward the forest, her hands tightening around the handle as if expecting an attack at any moment. A group of children, their laughter muted by the tension in the air, play a half-hearted game of tag near the village well, their eyes darting to the palisade every few moments. The scent of freshly baked bread wafts from a nearby bakery, but even that comforting aroma is undercut by the faint, acrid tang of smoke that lingers from the last raid. Thornwick is a village on the edge, its people clinging to hope even as fear gnaws at their hearts. The central square, a small patch of packed dirt surrounded by a handful of stalls, is quieter than usual, the market stalls sparsely stocked with meager offerings, wilted greens, a few bruised apples, a basket of eggs that look like they've seen better days. A blacksmith's forge sits at the edge of the square, its fire burning low, the smith's hammer silent as he stares out at the horizon, his hands idle for the first time in years. Inside the village's only tavern, the Rusty Tankard, the atmosphere is a mix of tension and fleeting distraction, a fragile bubble of normalcy in a world that feels increasingly unstable. The tavern is a squat, sturdy building with a sagging roof and walls that creak in the wind, its interior dimly lit by flickering oil lamps that cast long shadows across the worn wooden floor. The air inside is thick with the scent of stale ale, roasted meat, and the faint musk of unwashed bodies, a testament to the tavern's role as a gathering place for villagers seeking solace in the face of hardship. Villagers huddle over mugs of ale at rough-hewn tables, their whispers filled with dread about the latest orc raid that left 2 homes burned and a family missing. "They took old Marin's boy," one man says, his voice low and trembling. "Dragged him off into the woods. Gorzod's getting bolder." A woman at the next table clutches a wooden pendant carved with a protective rune, her lips moving in a silent prayer to whatever gods might still be listening. The bar itself is a long, scarred slab of oak, its surface stained with years of spilled drinks. The barkeep, a stout man with a graying beard, wiping down the counter with a rag that looks as tired as he does. At a corner table near the hearth, a tiefling bard with crimson skin, curling horns, a whip-like tail, and golden eyes strums a haunting melody on a rune-carved lute, his fingers dancing across the strings with a skill that belies his weary appearance. His music weaves through the smoky air, a mournful tune that speaks of lost love and forgotten heroes, drawing a small crowd despite the wary glances cast at his infernal features. The tiefling's crimson skin gleams faintly in the firelight, his horns curling back from his forehead like those of a ram, and his tail sways gently behind him, its tip brushing the floor with a soft, rhythmic tap. His golden eyes, bright and piercing, seem to see through the crowd, as if searching for something, or someone. A few villagers toss coppers into his hat, their generosity born more of habit than appreciation, but others mutter, "Devil's spawn," under their breath, their mistrust palpable. One grizzled old man, his face lined with years of hardship, spits into the sawdust on the floor, his eyes narrowing as he watches the bard. "Don't trust his kind," he grumbles to his companion. "Not with those horns and that tail. He'll bring trouble, mark my words." But the tiefling plays on, his music a quiet defiance against the prejudice that follows him wherever he goes, his fingers coaxing a melody that seems to linger in the air long after the notes have faded. The tavern door creaks open and Aramis steps inside, his cloak pulled tight to conceal his face, the hem brushing the floor with a soft rustle. His eyes, sharp and guarded, scan the room with a quiet intensity, taking in every detail: the huddled villagers, the flickering lamps, the tiefling bard in the corner. Aramis carries a heavy secret, one he guards with every step, though to the onlookers he's simply a reserved traveler with a shadowed past. In one hand he grips a gnarled staff, its wood etched with faint swirling patterns that catch the dim light of the tavern, marking him as a mage to those who know the signs. The staff is a sturdy piece, its surface worn smooth by years of use, its head capped with a small, polished stone that glimmers faintly with an inner light. A dagger hangs at his belt, its hilt simple but well worn, a common tool for mages who might need to defend themselves up close, its blade hidden beneath a leather sheath. At his side, a cloaked figure, Ubin, introduced as his brother, stands silently, his face hidden beneath a hood, his body hunched as if afflicted by some ailment. Ubin's cloak is tattered at the edges, its fabric stained with dirt and grime, and he carries a rusty longsword at his side, the blade's edge dulled by time but still sharp enough to be dangerous. The villagers glance at Ubin with pity, whispering about the poor leper, their voices tinged with a mix of sympathy and unease. But Aramis's protective stance keeps them at a distance, his eyes daring anyone to come closer. Aramis notices a notice on the wall, scrawled in hasty script on a piece of weathered parchment. "Heroes wanted. Stop the orc raids. Reward 50 gold." He tears it down with a swift motion, his jaw set with determination, his fingers tightening around the staff as he reads the words, his mind already calculating how this quest might serve his own hidden goals. At a nearby table, Draug Colvin sits alone, nursing a mug of water, his posture rigid and unyielding. He's a grizzled hunter, his face scarred from years of survival, his eyes cold and unyielding, like chips of flint in the dim light. A longbow rests against his chair, its wood polished to a dark sheen, its string taut and ready for use, and a quiver of arrows sits within easy reach, their fletching dyed a deep crimson. Draug's past is a wound that never heals. His tribe, the Colvin clan, was slaughtered by a Thri-kreen pack, fueling his hatred for the insectoid creatures and all bugs, large and small. The memory of that day haunts him still. The chittering of the Thri-kreen as they descended on his village, their mandibles clicking with hunger, their forearms wielding crude spears that gleamed with the blood of his kin. Draug had been a young man then, barely old enough to hold a bow, but he fought until his hands bled, until the ground was slick with the ichor of the insectoids and the blood of his family. He was the only survivor, left to wander the world with a heart full of rage and a vow to hunt down every Thri-kreen he encounters, his hatred extending to every bug that crosses his path, from the smallest beetle to the largest spider. The suffering of Thornwick stirs a quiet resolve in him to help these people, his protective instincts outweighing his mistrust of strangers. He glares at the tiefling bard, his lip curling in disgust, muttering to himself, "Colvin don't trust devils." His voice low and gruff, the words a bitter echo of the mistrust that has kept him alive all these years. The door slams open with a bang, and Battlequack strides in, his presence impossible to ignore, his heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. He's a towering figure in mismatched armor, dual-wielding two warhammers, one in each hand, their heads engraved with crude runes that speak of battles long past, their handles wrapped in worn leather that creaks with every movement. A duck-shaped helmet perches on his head, its beak painted a garish yellow that clashes with the dull steel, the helmet's visor pushed up to reveal a face split by a wide, reckless grin. His boisterous laugh fills the room as he calls for ale, tossing a copper to the barkeep with a flourish, the coin glinting in the firelight as it arcs through the air. Battlequack's origins are a mystery, but his love for gold and a good fight is clear, his eyes gleaming with a reckless excitement that borders on madness. He's here for the thrill of battle and the promise of reward, caring little for the deeper implications of the quest. He notices the tiefling bard and grins, tapping his foot to the melody, his armored boot thumping against the floor in time with the music. "Now that's a tune to smash skulls too," he bellows, his voice booming over the murmurs of the crowd, earning a few chuckles from the villagers and a faint smile from the bard, who nods in acknowledgement before returning to his song. The bard's music falters as the tavern door opens once more, revealing Eldrin, Thornwick's elder, his arrival silencing the room like a sudden gust of wind, snuffing out a candle. He's a weathered man in his 60s, leaning on a gnarled staff, its surface carved with intricate patterns that tell the story of Thornwick's founding, his gray eyes heavy with worry, their depths clouded with the weight of responsibility. The room falls silent as he speaks, his voice steady but urgent, carrying the authority of a man who has seen too much hardship. "Thornwick is dying," he declares, his words cutting through the murmurs like a blade through cloth. "Gorzod and his orcs raid us weekly, stealing crops, burning homes, taking our kin. I've sent for help, and you three are all we've got." He looks to Aramis, Draug, and Battlequack, his gaze lingering on each of them in turn, assessing their worth, before holding up a sack of gold that clinks softly, the sound a promise of reward, in a world where such promises are rare. 50 gold to stop Gorzod. Save us, and it's yours. Aramis steps forward, his staff tapping lightly on the wooden floor, the sound a soft counterpoint to the crackling of the hearth. His voice low and measured, carrying a quiet resolve that masks his true intentions. "I'll do it," he says, his mind already racing with thoughts of what he might gain from this venture. Perhaps something in Gorzald's cave could aid his own secretive plans. Ubin remains at his side, silent and still, his cloaked form drawing a few sympathetic glances from the villagers, his rusty longsword hanging at his side, its blade hidden beneath the folds of his cloak. Draug, after a long pause, nods curtly, his hand tightening around his mug, the knuckles whitening with the force of his grip. "If there's killing to be done, I'm in," he says, his voice a low growl, his eyes never leaving Eldrin's face, his resolve to protect the villagers evident in his steady gaze. Battlequack slams his mug down on the table, the impact sending a splash of ale across the wood, grinning with a feral excitement that makes the villagers nearest him edge away. "Gold and a fight, count me in, old man," he roars, his laughter echoing through the tavern, a stark contrast to the tension that hangs over the room, his war hammers clanging together as he adjusts his grip, his focus solely on the reward and the thrill of battle. Eldrin sighs with relief, the lines on his face softening slightly, and hands Aramis a rough sketch of the area, the parchment yellowed and creased from being folded and unfolded countless times. "They've been seen in Blackthorn Wood, near the old quarry. Start there," he says, his voice heavy with the hope that these strangers might be the salvation Thornwick so desperately needs. The trio set out, their alliance uneasy, each step a test of their ability to work together despite their differences. Aramis leads, his cloak billowing as he studies the sketch, his staff a steady weight in his hand, its polished stone catching the faint light of the morning sun as they step outside, his thoughts focused on what he might gain from this journey. Ubin follows closely, his cloaked form a silent guardian at Aramis's side, his rusty longsword ready to defend his brother if needed, though he moves with a stiffness that suggests his ailment has taken a toll. Draug follows, his bow ready, eyes scanning the trees for any sign of danger, his movements precise and controlled, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to snap, his focus on ensuring the group's safety despite his reservations about Aramis. Battlequack brings up the rear, humming the bard's tune, his dual warhammers swinging lazily at his sides, their scratched and dented heads a testament to countless battles, the runes on their surfaces glinting with a dull menace, his carefree demeanor a stark contrast to the tension between his companions. The forest is dense, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the ground beneath their feet soft with moss and fallen leaves. The trees tower overhead, their branches forming a canopy that filters the sunlight into a dappled pattern of light and shadow, the air alive with the chirping of birds and the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Draug's boots crunch on fallen leaves, the sound a sharp contrast to the stillness of the forest, and he suddenly stops, spotting a beetle scuttling across the path, its black shell gleaming in the dim light. With a snarl, he crushes it underfoot, the crack of its shell a small, violent sound in the quiet muttering. "Filthy bugs. I hate them all." Aramis glances at him, his expression unreadable, his staff tapping lightly against the ground as he adjusts his grip, filing away Drav's hatred as a potential leverage point for later. Battlequack quirks an eyebrow, his grin widening. "You really hate bugs, huh?" he asks, his tone teasing, unbothered by Drav's intensity as long as it doesn't interfere with the fight ahead. But Draug's only response is a glare that could freeze water, his hand tightening around his bow as he resumes walking. Before Draug can reply, the forest erupts with snarls, the sound a guttural roar that sends a flock of birds scattering from the treetops. 3 orcs burst from the underbrush, their crude axes gleaming with rust, their eyes wild with bloodlust. "Kill the intruders," one roars, his voice a deep guttural bellow, his tusks gleaming in the dappled light as he charges forward, his axe raised high. The other 2 follow, their movements clumsy but powerful, their leather armor creaking with every step. Aramis raises his staff, its tip glowing faintly with a soft, unexplainable light, and he mutters a quick incantation under his breath, the words a low, rhythmic chant that hums with power. He sends 3 darts of glowing energy streaking through the air, each one striking the lead orc with unerring accuracy, the impacts drawing grunts of pain as the orc staggers, blood seeping from the wounds, his focus on eliminating threats with ruthless efficiency. Draug knocks an arrow, his aim deadly and precise, his eyes narrowing as he tracks the second orc's movements, the fletching of his arrow brushing against his cheek as he draws the string back, his determination to protect his new allies evident in his steady hand. Battle Quack charges with a war cry. Quack and smash, his voice a thunderous roar that echoes through the forest, his dual warhammer swinging in a deadly arc as he barrels toward the 3rd orc, his duck-shaped helmet glinting with a ridiculous menace, his only thought the joy of the fight itself. The fight is brutal but swift, a chaotic dance of steel and magic in the heart of the forest. Aramis parries a heavy blow with his dagger, the orc's axe scraping against the blade with a screech of metal, the force of the strike sending a jolt up his arm. He counters with a thrust of his staff, the glowing tip slamming into the orc's chest, with a burst of force that sends the creature staggering back, its breath coming in ragged gasps, his movements calculated to end the threat quickly. Ubin steps forward, his rusty longsword drawn with a rasp of metal, his movements stiff but deliberate as he positions himself between Aramis and the orc, his cloaked form a silent shield. He swings the longsword in a wide arc, the blade catching the orc's arm and drawing a thin line of blood, the rusty edge still sharp enough to bite, though the strike lacks the strength of a healthy warrior, his role as Aramis's protector clear, even if his true nature remains hidden. Draug's arrow finds the second orc's throat, the shaft burying itself deep with a wet thunk, the orc's eyes widening in shock as it collapses to the ground, its axe falling from its limp hand. His shot driven by a need to protect the group and the villagers they've sworn to help. Battlequack's warhammers crush the 3rd orc's defenses, the first hammer slamming into the orc's shoulder with a crack of bone, the second following in a brutal overhead strike that caves in the orc's chest, the impact sending a spray of blood into the air, the orc's body crumpling like a broken doll. Battlequack's laughter ringing out as he revels in the chaos of battle. The first orc, still reeling from Aramis's magic, swings wildly, its axe catching Aramis's cloak and tearing a long gash in the fabric. Ubin intercepts the next blow, his long sword clashing against the axe with a jarring clang, the rusty blade holding firm as he pushes the orc back, giving Aramis a moment to recover. Aramis grits his teeth, his dagger flashing as he drives it into the orc's side, the blade sinking deep into flesh, the orc's roar of pain cut short as Draug's second arrow pierces its heart, ending the fight with a final, shuddering gasp, Draug's protective instincts ensuring the threat is eliminated. search the bodies, their breaths coming in heavy pants, the adrenaline of the fight still coursing through their veins. They find a cracked bracer, its leather worn and frayed, a rusty axe with a notched blade, and 8 coppers, the coins dull and tarnished, but still valuable in a village as poor as Thornwick. Aramis notices a tattered map fragment tucked into an orc's belt, the parchment yellowed and stained with blood, showing a cave in the ashen wastes marked with a jagged symbol that looks like a broken claw. This must be Gorzod's hideout, he says, pocketing it, his thoughts briefly drifting to Ubin. Could this cave hold something to help his brother, whatever his ailment might be, or perhaps something to further his own ambitions? He glances at Ubin, who stands silently at the edge of the clearing, his rusty longsword now sheathed, his cloaked form a mystery to the others, his presence a quiet burden Aramis carries alone. Following the map, they reach an abandoned quarry on the forest's edge, its stone walls scarred from years of use, the ground littered with broken tools and shattered rock. The quarry is a vast open pit, its walls rising steep and jagged, the air heavy with the scent of dust and decay. Orcs are hauling crates of stolen goods, their grunts and curses echoing off the stone, overseen by a hulking figure. Gorzod, his face a mess of scars, a jagged axe in hand, its blade stained with the blood of countless victims. Gorzod stands atop a ledge, his presence commanding, his eyes glinting with a cruel intelligence as he barks orders to his underlings. The trio sneaks closer, using the shadows of the quarry walls for cover, their movements silent and coordinated despite their earlier tensions. Aramis signals for them to spread out, his staff held low, its glow dimmed to avoid detection, his mind already calculating how to turn this situation to his advantage. Draug moves to the left, his bow ready, his eyes locked on Gorzod, his focus on ending the orc leader's threat to the villagers. Battlequack takes the right, his dual warhammers gripped tightly, his grin a mix of excitement and bloodlust, eager for the next fight. But a twig snaps under Battlequack's heavy boot, the sound a sharp crack in the stillness of the quarry, and Gorzod's head whips around, his scarred face twisting into a sneer. "You're too late, fools," he bellows, his voice echoing off the stone, a deep guttural roar that sends a shiver down Aramis's spine. Before they can reach him, Gorzod vanishes into the trees, his laughter a mocking taunt as he disappears, leaving 2 orcs to deal with them. The orcs turn, their eyes narrowing as they spot the trio, their axes raised in unison. "Kill 'em," one snarls, his tusks gleaming in the fading light, his leather armor creaking as he charges forward. The fight is chaotic, a whirlwind of violence in the heart of the quarry. Draug's arrows fly with lethal precision, one finding an orc's shoulder, the shaft pinning the creature's arm to its side, its axe falling from its grip as it roars in pain, his focus on protecting his companions unwavering. Aramis mutters a quick incantation, a shimmering barrier of magical energy flaring to life around him as the second orc swings its axe, the blade bouncing off with a burst of sparks, the orc's eyes widening in surprise. He follows with a swift strike of his dagger, the blade slicing across the orc's thigh, drawing a spray of dark blood that stains the ground, his actions driven by a cold efficiency. Ubin steps in as the orc recovers, his rusty longsword flashing as he intercepts a second blow aimed at Aramis, the blade clashing against the axe with a jarring clang, the rusty edge holding firm as he pushes the orc back, his movements stiff but protective, his loyalty to Aramis absolute. Battlequack smashes the first orc with his dual war hammers, the first hammer slamming into the orc's shoulder with a crack of bone, the second following in a brutal overhead strike that caves in the orc's chest, the impact sending a shock wave through the air, the orc's body crumpling with a wet crunch, his laughter echoing as he revels in the destruction. The second orc, bleeding and enraged, swings its axe at Aramis again, but the magical barrier holds, deflecting the blow, and Aramis drives his dagger into the orc's chest, the blade sinking deep with a sickening squelch. Ubin follows with a final strike, his long sword slashing across the orc's back, the rusty blade biting deep as the orc falls to its knees, yielding a notched dagger, a dented buckler, and 10 coppers as it collapses, its breath rattling in its throat. As the dust settles, a frantic voice calls out, cutting through the silence that follows the fight. Joran, a farmer with dirt-streaked clothes, stumbles from the bushes, his eyes wide with fear, his hands trembling as he clutches a tattered shawl. "Please, they took my son," he begs, his voice breaking with desperation, tears streaming down his weathered face. "The orcs, they dragged him to that cave. I followed them, but I couldn't save him." His words dissolve into sobs, his body shaking as he falls to his knees, his hands clawing at the dirt in anguish. They find a wounded orc pinned under a fallen crate, groaning in pain, its leg twisted at an unnatural angle, its face pale with shock, a deep gash across its side, oozing dark blood. Aramis kneels beside him, his staff planted firmly in the ground, its glow dimmed but still present, his voice cold and unyielding. "Where's Gorzod? What's he planning?" he demands, his eyes narrowing as he studies the orc's face, his tone sharp and devoid of empathy. The orc grits its teeth, its eyes flickering with defiance, but its resolve is already crumbling under the weight of its pain. I'll tell you," it rasps, its voice trembling. "Just don't hurt me more." Aramis's lips curl into a faint, chilling smile, and without a word he drives the tip of his staff into the orc's open wound, the polished stone grinding against torn flesh. The orc howls, its body convulsing as fresh blood seeps from the gash, its defiance shattering under the agony. "He's in the cave," it screams, its voice raw with pain. "In the ashen wastes, planning something big, a ritual, to summon more warriors." Aramis pulls the staff back, the stone now slick with blood, his expression unchanged as he wipes it on the orc's tattered armor, satisfied with the information, but already considering how to use it to his advantage. Draug watches, his jaw tight, his hand gripping his bow as he fights the urge to intervene, his protective instincts clashing with the necessity of the moment. "We've got what we need," he mutters, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the suffering orc, a flicker of unease in his gaze. Battlequack shrugs, already counting the coppers, his fingers deftly sorting through the loot with a practiced ease, unbothered by the orc's screams as long as the gold keeps coming. The sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the quarry, the air growing cooler as the light fades. The trio decides to make camp for the night, knowing they'll need their strength for the journey to the ashen wastes. They find a small clearing a short distance from the quarry, the ground soft with moss, the air filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. Aramis sets up a small fire, muttering a soft incantation to produce a tiny spark of magic that ignites the kindling, the flame flaring to life with a soft crackle. His staff propped against a tree, its glow dimmed to a faint shimmer, his focus on ensuring his own comfort as he plans his next move. Ubin sits nearby, his cloaked form still and silent, his rusty longsword resting across his lap, his presence a quiet mystery that draws curious glances from Drav and Battlequack, though neither speaks of it. Draug takes first watch, his bow resting across his lap, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger, his thoughts drifting to the Thri-kreen that destroyed his tribe. He remembers the night his village fell, the screams of his kin echoing in his ears, the chittering of the Thri-kreen as they tore through the tents, their mandibles dripping with blood. He clenches his jaw, his hand tightening around his bow, his vow to hunt down every Thri-kreen burning in his chest, his hatred for all bugs a constant, simmering rage. But his focus remains on the task at hand, saving Joran's son and stopping Gorzod. Battlequack sits by the fire, polishing his war hammers with a rag, the runes on their heads glinting in the firelight, his grin never fading even as he works. "Good fight today," he says, his voice a low rumble, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Nothing like smashing a few orc skulls to get the blood pumping, eh?" He glances at Aramis, his grin widening. "You're not half bad with that staff, mage. What's your story, anyway? You and your brother don't talk much," he asks, his curiosity casual, more interested in passing the time than in the answer itself. Aramis's eyes flicker to Ubin, a shadow passing over his face, but he keeps his voice steady. "We've had a hard road," he says simply, his tone closing the door on further questions, his guarded nature a shield against prying eyes. Battlequack shrugs, returning to his polishing, his thoughts already on the next fight and the gold that awaits them. Aramis stares into the flickering flames, his thoughts a tangled web of ambition and secrecy. The cave in the ashen wastes could hold more than just Gorzod. It might contain relics or knowledge that could further his pursuits, perhaps even a way to strengthen his hold over Ubin or expand his hidden powers. He adjusts his cloak, the weight of his dagger at his belt, a reminder of the dangers ahead, but also of the opportunities. Drav's eyes never leave the shadows beyond the firelight, his bowstring taut in his hands, ready to loose an arrow at the first sign of danger. His resolve to save the villagers and Joran's son, a quiet fire in his chest. Battlequack leans back against a tree, his war hammers resting beside him, taking a swig from a small flask, the sharp tang of cheap whiskey burning his throat as he chuckles to himself. 50 gold and a good scrap, he mutters, his voice a low rumble of satisfaction. That's the life. The fire crackles, its warmth a small comfort against the chill of the night, but the tension between the trio lingers like a shadow. Their differences, Drav's vigilance, Aramis's calculation, Battlequack's recklessness, form an uneasy balance, their shared purpose binding them for now. The journey to the ashen wastes looms ahead, a path fraught with danger and uncertainty, but also the promise of answers, each driven by their own desires in a fragile alliance.